The day my world fell apart started like any other. The Seville sun filtered through the curtains of Lucas's room, my 7-year-old little boy, illuminating his pale and haggard face. It had been months since leukemia had stolen the color from his cheeks and the shine from his eyes, but that morning, something was different. His breathing was weaker, more irregular. "Martin," I called to my husband with a trembling voice. "I think we should call the doctor." Martin entered the room, his face a mask of worry and exhaustion. We had taken turns for endless nights caring for Lucas, hoping against hope that a miracle would happen. But that morning, we both knew the end was near. The doctor arrived within minutes, but by the time he entered the room, Lucas was already gone. His small body, which had fought so bravely for months, had finally given up. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said, his voice barely a whisper in the silent room. I collapsed onto Lucas's bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to believe that my child, my baby, was gone. Martin sat next to me, his strong arms around me, his tears mixing with mine as we cried together. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and disbelief. Family and friends began to arrive, their voices a distant murmur as I held on to the reality that my son was gone forever. Marta, my sister Anna's voice brought me out of my stupor. "We need to start the funeral preparations. Do you want us to do it here at home?" I nodded mechanically. The thought of sending Lucas to a cold funeral home was unbearable to me. I wanted to keep him close, in the home he had loved so much, surrounded by his toys and drawings. Martin did most of the arrangements. I saw him move around the house like an automaton, making calls, receiving people who came to offer their condolences. His pain was as deep as mine, but he had always been the strong one, the one who kept his composure in crises. "Marta, honey," he said to me at one point, sitting next to me on the couch. "I have spoken to the priest. He will come tomorrow to discuss the details of the service. Is there anything in particular you want?" I shook my head, unable to form words. How could I think of details when my heart was in pieces? As night fell, our house was filled with flowers and sympathy cards. The sweet smell of the flower arrangements turned my stomach, cruelly reminding me that these beautiful flowers were here to honor my son's death. "Do you remember when Lucas brought that bunch of dandelions from the park?" Martin said suddenly, a sad smile on his face. "He was so proud of his bouquet for you." The memory hit me like a wave, bringing with it a mix of pain and love so intense I could barely breathe. "Yes," I whispered. He put them in his Batman glass and declared them to be the most beautiful flowers in the world. For a moment, we got lost in the memories of our son, his laughter, his love for life. But the cruel reality fell upon us again when Anna entered the room with a small box. "I found some photos of Lucas for the service," he said softly. "I thought we could make a collage." I nodded, unable to look at the photos. Every image of Lucas smiling, playing, living, was a painful reminder of everything we had lost. That night, Martin and I lay in our bed, holding each other in silence. We don't sleep. How could we sleep knowing that the next day we would have to say goodbye to our little one forever? How are we going to move forward? I whispered in the dark. Martin squeezed me tighter. "I don't know, my love. But we will do it together. For Lucas." As dawn approached, bringing with it the day I never wanted to come, I held on to Martin, to the memories of Lucas, and to the silent promise that, somehow, we would find the strength to survive this unimaginable loss. The morning of Lucas's wake dawned grey and cold, as if the sky itself was mourning our loss. I got out of bed with my body aching and my heart even heavier. Martin was already on his feet, making coffee in the kitchen. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the occasional clinking of cups and the muffled murmur of voices of the first family members arriving to help with the preparations. I headed to the bathroom, avoiding looking at myself in the mirror. I didn't want to see the reflection of a mother who had lost her son. As I washed my face with cold water, trying to clear the haze of pain that clouded my mind, I heard the phone ring. "I'll answer," Martin shouted from the kitchen. I sighed, grateful that I didn't have to talk to anyone right now. However, seconds later, Martin appeared in the bathroom door, phone in hand and a bewildered expression on his face. "It's my mother," he said quietly. "He wants to talk to you." I frowned, confused. Paula, my mother-in-law, had called the day before to express her condolences. What more could she want now? Reluctantly, I took the phone from Martin's hands. "Hello," I said, my voice hoarse from crying and lack of sleep. "Marta, dear." Paula's cheerful voice resonated in my ear, so discordant with my mood that for a moment I was left speechless. "I hope I don't bother you so early, but I need your help urgently." I blinked, unable to process what I was hearing. "Aid? On a day like today?" "Paula, I started, but she cut me off, her voice full of excitement. "It's about Ignacio's birthday party. You know he turns 50 next week and I want it to be a surprise. I thought you could help me with the organization. You have such good taste in these things." I felt like I had been slapped. The world around me seemed to stop. Was he really talking about a party? Today? The day of your grandson's wake? "Paula," I managed to say, my voice shaking with disbelief and rising anger, "today is Lucas's wake." "How can you?" "Oh, yeah, sure," she replied, and for a moment I thought she'd realize her mistake. But he continued, "That's why I thought I'd call you now. I know you'll be busy later and I wanted to take this opportunity to agree on the party. How about we meet tomorrow to plan?" Anger exploded inside me like a volcano. The tears I had been holding back all morning began to fall freely down my cheeks. "How dare you?" I shouted into the phone. "My son, your grandson, just died. And you want to plan a party?" "Marta, honey, don't be upset," Paula responded, her voice now tinged with concern. "Life must go on. Ignacio deserves to celebrate his birthday." I couldn't take it anymore. With a cry of pain and fury, I hung up the phone so hard I nearly broke it. Martin, who had been watching the scene with growing alarm, approached me. "What happened?" he asked, putting his hands on my trembling shoulders. Between sobs, I told him about his mother's call. I watched as his face went from confusion to shock to disbelief. "It must be a misunderstanding," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Mom can't be so insensitive." But I knew what I had heard. Without saying another word, I grabbed my phone and blocked Paula's number. He couldn't deal with this now. Not today. Not when we were about to say goodbye to our little one forever. Martin tried to calm me down, his soft words contrasting with the storm of emotions raging inside me. "Marta, my love, breathe. Today we need to be strong for Lucas. Don't let this distract you from what's important." I knew he was right, but the pain and anger still burned in my chest. How could someone be so cruel, so insensitive? How could Paula think about parties when we had just lost our son? As the house filled with people, I forced myself to focus on the preparations for the wake. Every time the phone rang, I would tense up, fearing another call from Paula. But he didn't call again. That night, as the visitors left and we were left alone with our grief, I couldn't help but think about Paula's call. His cheerful voice, talking about balloons and cakes, resonated in my mind, a cruel contrast to the deathly silence of our house, now empty without Lucas's laughter. Martin held me tightly, whispering words of comfort, but I knew he was also struggling to understand his mother's actions. As we prepared for the long night of standing vigil over our son's body, I couldn't help but wonder how we would deal with not only our loss, but also this unexpected family betrayal. The morning after Lucas's wake, I woke up with a feeling of emptiness that seemed to consume everything. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by Martin's soft snoring next to me. I got up carefully, not wanting to wake him. He knew he needed to rest after the long night of being awake. I dragged myself to the kitchen, my movements slow and heavy. Each step reminded me that I would no longer hear Lucas' hurried footsteps running down the hallway. No more morning laughter, no more requests for cereal with extra sugar. Just silence. While I was making coffee, my mind went back to Paula's call from the day before. The anger he had felt at that moment surged again, mixing with a deep sense of betrayal and pain. How could he be so insensitive? So oblivious to our suffering? The ringing of the phone startled me, spilling coffee on the counter. With trembling hands, I took the device. It was Paula. Again. "Marta, dear," her voice sounded happy, as if nothing had happened. "I hope you were able to rest a little. I wanted to talk to you about Ignacio's party." I've been thinking about the menu and I couldn't take it anymore. The anger he had been holding back exploded like a geyser. Stop it. I shouted into the phone. How dare you call again? How can you talk about parties when we just buried Lucas? Your grandson. But Marta, Paula tried to interrupt, her voice now tinged with confusion. Life must go on. Ignacio deserves to celebrate his birthday and… No. I cut her off. I don't want to hear any more about parties or celebrations. My son is dead, Paula. Dead. And you can only think about cakes and balloons. What kind of grandmother are you? Without waiting for a response, I hung up the phone so hard that the device bounced off the table. With shaking hands, I reached into the settings and blocked his number. No more calls, no more insensitivity, no more pain added to what I already felt. Marta. Martin's voice startled me. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, his face a mix of worry and confusion. What happened? Was that my mother again? I nodded, unable to speak. The tears she had been holding back began to fall freely. Martin walked over and wrapped me in his arms. I'm so sorry, he murmured into my hair. I don't know what's wrong with Mom. This isn't like her. Isn't it? I asked, pulling back to look him in the eyes. Because it seems pretty clear that he cares more about Ignacio's party than the fact that his grandson just died. Martin sighed deeply. There must be an explanation. Maybe it's their way of dealing with grief. Some people cling to normality when facing loss. Normal? I repeated, incredulous. Martin, there is nothing normal about this. Our son has died. How can you think about parties at a time like this? I saw the conflict in Martin's eyes. I knew he was caught between his pain for Lucas, his love for me, and his loyalty to his mother. But at that moment, I couldn't find compassion in my heart for Paula. I've blocked your number, I informed him. I can't deal with this right now. I can't listen to her talk about balloons and cakes when all I can think about is how I'll never see Lucas blow out the candles on his birthday cake again. Martin nodded slowly. I understand, he said softly. I'll talk to her. I'll try to make her understand. But I didn't want to hear any more about Paula or her explanations. I felt betrayed, hurt beyond words. At that moment, I just wanted to shut myself away in my grief, away from anything or anyone who could minimize the loss of Lucas. The next few days passed in a haze of pain and anger. I refused to answer calls, to see anyone other than Martin. Even with him, conversations were minimal. What could we say that would ease our pain? One afternoon, while I was organizing Lucas's things, a task that broke my heart but that I couldn't avoid, I found a drawing he had made of the whole family, including Grandma Paula. Seeing it brought a new wave of tears to my eyes. How could Paula ignore the love Lucas had for her? How could she be so insensitive to the loss of this little boy who adored her? Martin tried several times to talk to me about his mother, but I refused to listen. The wound was too fresh, the pain too intense. Every time I mentioned his name, I felt my heart tear a little more. I need time, I told him one night, as we lay in bed, the space between us seeming like an abyss. I can't forgive this. Not now. Martin nodded silently, respecting my decision even though I could see the pain in his eyes. I knew I was grieving not only from the loss of Lucas, but also from this family conflict that threatened to tear us apart even further. As the days turned into weeks, my anger toward Paula did not diminish. It became a constant fire, fueled by the pain of loss and the sense of betrayal. He couldn't imagine a time when he could forgive her, when he could see her again without feeling this consuming rage. But fate had other plans for us, plans that would test our limits and force us to face our pain in ways we could never have imagined. The day of Lucas's wake dawned grey and gloomy, as if heaven itself shared our pain. Our house quickly filled with family and friends, all with solemn faces and words of comfort that barely registered. I moved like an automaton, receiving hugs and condolences with a forced smile that threatened to break at any moment. Lucas's small coffin was in the center of the room, surrounded by flowers and photos of his short but joyful life. Every time my eyes landed on him, I felt my heart tear a little more. Martin remained by my side, his hand firm on my back, offering silent support that I appreciated more than I could express. It's so unfair, Anna, my sister, whispered, hugging me. He was so small, so full of life. I nodded, unable to form words. The lump in my throat threatened to choke me. Suddenly, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. Among the crowd of sorrowful faces, I saw one that made my blood run cold in my veins, Paula. My mother-in-law entered the room, her face a mix of pain and determination. Marta, she called, advancing toward me. I need to talk to you. The initial shock quickly gave way to burning anger. How dare he come here, after everything he had said? After his insensitivity? Get out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But Paula continued advancing, ignoring the surprised looks of those present. Please, Marta, just listen to me, he pleaded, extending a hand toward me. Something inside me broke. All the anger, pain, and frustration he had been holding back exploded into a piercing scream. Out! I shouted, my voice echoing in the now silent room. You have no right to be here. Not after what you did. Those present stood paralyzed, staring at the scene in horror and confusion. Paula stepped back, surprised by my reaction. But, Marta, I just wanted. I don't care what you want. I interrupted her, advancing towards her. My son is dead. Your grandson is dead. And all you can think about is parties. You're a shame as a grandmother. Martin intervened, placing himself between us. Mom, please, he said quietly but firmly. This is neither the time nor the place. Paula looked at her son, tears forming in her eyes. But I just wanted to help. I thought. You thought wrong. I shouted over Martin's shoulder. Get out of here. I don't want you at my son's funeral. The room was filled with uncomfortable murmurs. I saw some relatives exchange worried glances, while others tried to console the children present who had begun to cry, frightened by the screams. Martin, with a pained expression on his face, grabbed his mother by the shoulders. Come on, Mom, he said softly. I'll take you home. As I watched them leave, I felt my legs give out. I collapsed next to Lucas's coffin, sobbing uncontrollably. Anna ran to my side, hugging me tightly. Sure, it's okay, he murmured, stroking my hair. Let it out, Martha. Let it out. The rest of the wake passed in a blur. I barely registered the words of comfort, the hugs, the looks of compassion. My mind kept replaying the scene with Paula, shame mixing with anger and pain. When Martin returned hours later, he sat next to me in silence. I could feel the tension in his body, the conflict between his loyalty to me and his mother. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice hoarse. I didn't know it was coming. I nodded, unable to look him in the eyes. How could he, Martin? How could he come here after everything he said? He sighed deeply. She says she wanted to apologize. She didn't realize how insensitive she had been until I talked to her. I let out a bitter laugh. And you thought Lucas's wake was the right time to do it? Martin didn't respond, and his silence hurt me more than any words he could have said. I knew I was caught in the middle of all of this, suffering not only from the loss of our son, but also from this family conflict. As the night wore on and the last visitors left, I sat next to Lucas's coffin, gently caressing the polished wood. What would he think of all this? My sweet boy, always so happy, so full of love for everyone. Would he be disappointed in me for acting like this? I'm sorry, my love, I whispered, tears falling silently. Mom is so sorry. I felt Martin's hand on my shoulder, and for the first time since Lucas died, I allowed myself to lean fully on him. I cried for our son, for the future he would never have, for the family that was now fractured. And as the night gave way to a new day, I realized that the road to healing would be long and difficult. Not only would we have to learn to live without Lucas, but also how to navigate the turbulent waters this conflict had created in our family. The funeral would be tomorrow, and with it, the final closing of this chapter of our lives. But as I prepared to face another day of grief, I couldn't help but wonder if we could ever truly recover from this loss, if we could ever be a united family again. The weeks following Lucas's funeral became a blur of grey days and endless nights. Our house, once filled with laughter and games, now seemed like a silent mausoleum, every corner a painful reminder of what we had lost. I immersed myself in a mechanical routine, getting up every morning only because my body demanded it. I made breakfast that I barely touched, cleaned rooms that were already spotless, all to keep my hands busy and my mind away from the abyss of pain that threatened to swallow me. Martin was trying to reach me. I could see it in his tired eyes and hesitant gestures. But I had built a wall around myself, impenetrable even to him. Our conversations had been reduced to monosyllables and vague gestures. The silence between us grew day by day, an abyss that seemed impossible to cross. One morning, while obsessively cleaning Lucas's room for the umpteenth time, I found his favorite teddy bear hidden behind the bed. It was like someone had punched me in the stomach. I fell to my knees, hugging the stuffed animal to my chest, sobs shaking my body with a strength I thought I had exhausted weeks ago. Martin's voice sounded from the door, tinged with concern and pain. "My love, please." But he couldn't answer. The pain was too intense, too raw. I stayed there, rocking back and forth, clinging to the last tangible vestige of my son. Martin knelt next to me, wrapping me in his arms. For a moment, I allowed myself to sink into his embrace, seeking the comfort I had been denying myself. But then, like a bolt of lightning, the memory of Paula at the wake crossed my mind, and I turned away abruptly. "I can't," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "I can't do this, Martin." "What can't you do?" he asked softly, confusion and fear evident in his voice. "This. Us. Your family." The words came out in a rush. "Every time I look at you, I see Lucas. And every time I think of Lucas, I remember your mother at the wake, and I just can't." I saw the pain cross his face, like a dark shadow. "Marta, please. Let's not walk away from each other. Not now. I need you, and I know you need me." But I was already on my feet, backing toward the door. "I need to be alone. Please, Martin. Give me space." Days turned into weeks, and my isolation deepened. I rejected calls from friends and family. I ignored worried messages from my sister Anna. The outside world became a distant and alien place, while I sank deeper and deeper into my depression. Martin, true to his word, gave me the space I asked for, even though I could feel his worry and pain as a constant presence in the house. I listened to him at night, his restless steps in the hallway, his labored breathing on the other side of the door to our room, where we no longer slept together. One afternoon, while I was staring blankly out the window, the doorbell rang. I ignored the sound, as I had been doing for weeks. But this time, the person on the other side of the door did not give up. The doorbell rang again and again, until finally, more out of irritation than curiosity, I crawled to the door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with Ignacio, Martin's brother. His normally jovial face was serious and worried. "Marta," he said softly, "we need to talk." For a moment, I considered slamming the door in his face. But something in his gaze, a mix of determination and compassion, stopped me. With a sigh of defeat, I stepped aside to let him enter. We sat in the living room, the silence heavy between us. Finally, Ignacio spoke. "Marta, I know you're hurting. We all are. But you can't go on like this. You're destroying yourself, and you're destroying Martin in the process." I felt anger, that old companion, begin to bubble up inside me. "How dare you? You have no idea what I'm going through. You didn't lose your son." Ignacio did not back down from my hostility. "You're right, I didn't lose my son. I lost my nephew, whom I loved as if he were my own. And I'm watching myself lose my brother and sister-in-law day by day." His words hit me hard, momentarily disarming me. I can't get over it, Ignacio. I don't know how." "No one expects you to get over it," he said softly. "But you need to learn to live with it. And you need to let those who love you help you. Like your mother." I spat the words bitterly. "The one who wanted to plan your birthday party while we were burying Lucas?" Ignacio sighed deeply. "Mom made a terrible mistake. She was shocked, Marta. We all were. Some people cling to normalcy when faced with such a big loss. It wasn't right, but it wasn't malicious either." I wanted to scream at him, tell him that there was no excuse for what Paula had done. But I was so tired. So incredibly tired. I don't know how to forgive her, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not asking you to forgive her, Ignacio responded. I'm asking you not to lose yourself in this pain. Lucas wouldn't want that, Marta. He would want you to live, to love, to remember the happy moments. The tears she had been holding back for weeks began to fall freely. Ignacio came over and hugged me, and for the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to really cry, releasing all the pain and anger I had been holding in. When I finally calmed down, Ignacio got up to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked at me seriously. Think about what I've told you, Marta. And please, talk to Martin. He needs you as much as you need him. That night, after Ignacio left, I lay awake in bed, his words echoing in my mind. I could hear Martin in the guest room, his irregular breathing giving away that he wasn't sleeping either. With a shaky sigh, I stood up and walked towards his door. I hesitated for a moment before knocking softly. Martin, I whispered. Can we talk? There was a moment of silence, and then the door opened. Martin was there, with deep circles under his eyes and a haggard face, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. Always, he replied, his voice hoarse from lack of use. We sat on the bed, the silence between us heavy with unexpressed emotions. Finally, I took his hand in mine. I'm sorry, I said softly. I'm sorry I walked away. I didn't know how to handle all of this. Martin squeezed my hand. I'm sorry too. I should have insisted more, I should have. I interrupted him. No, Martin. We were both lost. But I think it's time we tried to find ourselves again. Together. For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. He pulled me close to him, and we hugged each other, letting the tears flow freely. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The pain of losing Lucas would never completely go away. And we still had to deal with the issue of Paula and the fracture in our family. But as I lay there, in Martin's arms, I felt for the first time in a long time that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. Together. A month after Lucas's funeral, life had taken on a new normal, albeit a fragile and painful one. Martin and I had begun to rebuild our relationship, step by step, day by day. We shared more, we talked more, although the pain remained a constant presence between us. That Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixing with the smell of toast. For a moment, I could almost imagine Lucas running down the hallway, ordering his favorite cereal. The memory hit me hard, and I had to lean on the counter to catch my breath. Are you okay? Martin's voice brought me out of my thoughts. He was standing in the kitchen door, his face a mix of concern and understanding. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Yeah, just, you know. I didn't need to explain more. Martin walked over and wrapped me in a hug. We stayed like that for a moment, finding comfort in each other's presence. The sound of the phone broke the silence. I looked at the device with apprehension. Since Lucas's death, calls rarely brought good news. Do you want me to answer? Martin offered. I shook my head. No, it's okay. I'll do it. With a sigh, I picked up the phone. The number on the screen was unfamiliar to me. Hello. I responded, my voice cautious. At first, there was only silence on the other end of the line. I was about to hang up when I heard a muffled sob. Hello. Who is this? I asked, worry rising in my chest. Marta, the voice was barely a whisper, but I recognized her immediately. It was Paula. My first instinct was to hang up. The anger he had been holding back for weeks threatened to overflow. But something in his voice, something broken and desperate, stopped me. Paula, I said, my voice cold. What do you want? Martin looked at me surprised, his eyes full of questions. I gestured for him to wait. Marta, I'm so sorry, Paula sobbed into the phone. Her voice was unrecognizable, so different from the happy-go-lucky woman who had called on the day of Lucas's wake. I know I don't have the right to call you, but I didn't know who else to turn to. I felt my heart race. Despite my resentment, I couldn't help but worry. What happened, Paula? There was a pause, filled only by the sound of her sobs. Finally, with a broken voice, he answered, "It's Ignacio. He had a stroke. He's in the hospital." I felt like the ground was opening up under my feet. Ignacio, Martin's brother, Lucas's favorite uncle. The man who had come to talk to me just a few weeks ago, trying to help us heal. What? When? How is he? The questions came rushing out of my mouth. "It was during his birthday party," Paula replied, her voice cracking. "He collapsed suddenly. The doctors say it's serious. He's in a coma and they don't know if he'll recover." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. The party that Paula had been so desperate to plan, the same that had caused so much friction between us, now he had become the stage of another tragedy. "Marta," Paula continued, his voice barely audible. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything." I closed my eyes, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Rabies, pain, fear, compassion. Everything mixed inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. "Paula," I finally said, my voice softer than I expected. "What hospital is there?" I gave the information to Martin, who was already looking for the car keys. While we were preparing to leave, my mind spinning. Was he doing the right thing to go? Could you face Paula after everything that had happened? The trip to the hospital was silent. Martin drove, his face a mask of concern and fear. I looked out the window, seeing the city pass without really seeing it. When we arrived at the hospital, Paula was in the waiting room. Seeing her was a shock. The elegant and always impeccable woman that I remembered had disappeared. Instead there was a hunched figure, with his face swollen by crying and disheveled hair. Seeing us, he got up wobble. For a moment, we look at each other in silence, years of pain and resentment among us. Then, without thinking, I took a step forward and hugged it. Paula collapsed in my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Marta," he repeated again and again in tears. "I'm so sorry." I felt my own tears start falling. They weren't just for Ignacio, I realized. They were for Lucas, for the pain we had passed, because of the family we had been and that we were afraid to never be. "It's fine," I murmured, surprised by my own words. "We are here now." Martin joined our hug, and for a moment, we stayed like this, united in our pain and our hope. When we finally separated, Paula looked at us with red but grateful eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said gently. "I know I don't deserve it, after how I acted." "Paula," I interrupted gently. "Now it's not the time for that. Let's concentrate on Ignacio." He nodded, cleaning his tears. "Doctors say that the next 48 hours are critical. If you exceed tonight..." His voice went out, unable to finish the phrase. Martin took his hand, squeezing her gently. "It will overcome it," he said with a conviction that he didn't feel. "Ignacio is strong." We sat down in the waiting room, time spending slowly. The hours became a blurred mixture of cold coffee, conversations in a low voice and occasional visits of doctors with serious faces. At some point at night, while Martin, Didion and Paula had gone to look for more coffee, I found my thoughts alone. I thought about Lucas, how I would have been worried about her favorite uncle. I thought of Ignacio, how I had come to see me, trying to help me get out of my depression. And I thought of Paula, how his wrong attempt to maintain normality after Lucas's death had led to this moment. I realized that the pain had changed us all. He had made us act in ways we would never have imagined. Paula, in her despair for clinging to something normal, had seemed insensitive. I, in my pain, had isolated me. And now, here we were, together again for another tragedy. When Paula returned, I really looked at her for the first time in weeks. I saw the pain in his eyes, repentance, fear. And I felt that something inside me was beginning to change. "Paula," I said gently. She looked at me, surprised. "I think we have a lot to talk about. When all this ends." She nodded, the tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Marta. I will do what is necessary to fix things among us." It was not a forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. A recognition that, despite all pain and errors, we were still a family. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal together. While the night gave way to the morning, I found myself praying not only for Ignacio, but for all of us. By force to overcome this new test, for wisdom to forgive, and for the hope that, in some way, we could emerge from this stronger and more united than before. The sun began to look through the hospital windows, bringing with them the promise of a new day. And with him, the hope that, no matter what the future brought, we would face him together. The days in the hospital became a week, and then 2. Ignacio remained in a coma, his stable but critical condition. We turned to be with him, talking, reading him, waiting for a sign that he would listen to us. One afternoon, while sitting next to Ignacio's bed, holding his inert hand, Paula entered the room. He looked exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes, but there was a determination in his gaze that he had not seen before. "Marta," he said gently, sitting in the chair on the other side of the bed. "I think it's time for us to have that conversation." I nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of apprehension and relief. He knew that this moment would come, but he wasn't sure to be prepared. Paula took a deep breath before starting. "First, I want to apologize. My behavior after Lucas's death was unforgivable. I was so scared, so lost. Lucas was my first grandson, and losing it was as if the world stopped making sense." His words hit me strongly, bringing back the pain of those first days after losing Lucas. "So why the party?" I asked, my voice just a whisper. "Why insist on something so trivial?" Paula closed her eyes, silent tears running down her cheeks. "Because it was the only thing I could control. Everything else was falling apart, and I thought that if I could maintain something normal, something happy, maybe the pain would not be so intense. He was selfish and stupid." I know now. I was silent for a moment, processing his words. Part of me wanted to cling to anger, to the resentment that had been my shield for so long. But another part, a part that grew every day, understood the fear and despair that their actions had motivated. "I am also sorry," I finally said. "I am sorry to have moved away, to have built a wall between us. I was so consumed by my own pain that I couldn't see yours." Paula extended her hand on Ignacio's bed, and after a moment of doubt, I took it. We stayed like this, united by the unconscious man among us, each lost in his own thoughts. "Do you know?" Paula said after a while. "The night before Ignacio's party, I had a dream with Lucas. I was laughing, playing in the park as I used to do. I woke up crying, but also with a strange feeling of peace. I think that was what gave me strength for go ahead with the party. I felt a knot in my throat. I have also dreamed of him," I confessed. "Sometimes they are nightmares, where I lose it again and again. But other times it is as if it had never left." Paula pressed my hand. "He will never leave, Marta. While we remember, while we talk about him, Lucas will always be with us." At that moment, I felt as if a weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a beginning. A mutual recognition of our shared pain and our love for Lucas. We were so absorbed in our conversation that at the beginning we do not notice the slight movement in bed. It was Paula who saw it first. "Ignacio!" he exclaimed, leaning forward. "Marta, I think he is moving." I stood up a jump, my heart beating hard. Ignacio's fingers moved slightly, and his eyelids trembled as if they were fighting to open them. "I'm going to look for a doctor," I said, running towards the door. In the hall, I met Martin, who returned with coffee. "Martin, Ignacio is waking up," I shouted, dragging him back to the room. The following minutes were an activity whirlwind. Doctors and nurses entered and left the room, doing tests and asking questions. We expect anxiously, clinging to each other in search of support. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the main doctor approached us with a tired but genuine smile. "Mrs. Garcia," he said, heading to Paula. "His son is awake and responding well. It is still early to make a complete forecast, but these are very positive signs." Paula collapsed in Martin's arms, sobbing relief. I leaned against the wall, feeling that my legs could give in any time. When they finally allowed us to see Ignacio, he was weak and confused, but awake. His eyes toured our faces, stopping in each of us. What happened?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Martin approached, taking his brother's hand. You had a stroke, Nacho. You've been in a coma for almost 3 weeks. Ignacio blinked, processing the information. Then, to our surprise, a weak smile was drawn on his lips. I guess I missed my birthday party, huh? The tension in the room broke with laughs mixed with tears. He was so typical of Ignacio, making a joke even in the most difficult moments. While we were there, surrounding Ignacio's bed, I felt something changed inside me. The pain for Lucas's loss was still there, it would probably always be. But next to him, something new grew, hope. Hope that our family, although broken and changed, could heal. Hope that the love we shared was stronger than the pain we had endured. I looked at Paula, who held Ignacio's other hand, her bright eyes of tears but also with joy. Our looks crossed and, for the first time in a long time, we share a genuine smile. It wouldn't be easy. I knew we still had a long way to go. Ignacio would face a difficult recovery, and we would have to learn to navigate this new family dynamic. But at that time, surrounded by love and relief that filled the room, I knew we would achieve it. Together. While the sun put out of the hospital window, bathing the room in a golden light, I thought about Lucas. He could almost feel his presence, his laugh mixing with ours. And for the first time since his death, the memory did not bring only pain, but also a sweet warmth. We are fine, my love, I whispered silently. We are healing. And while the night fell on the hospital, carrying the promises of a new day and a new beginning, I felt a peace that I had not experienced in a long time. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but we were no longer walking alone. We had each other, and the love of Lucas guiding us in every step of the road.